Hi everyone, Professor Seraphina here again, and I thought I would just try to pick up where I left off with my camera falling, of course. So I have it set up differently today, maybe a little less lighting, but a little more secure, stable there. So we covered subjectivism, some of objectivism, and then cultural and subjective relativism. I touched on universalism, and then a bit on absolutism, and I think that's where technology decided to do its own thing. So let's just recap a little that objectivism sees morality as an objective truth out there somewhere, perhaps otherworldly, some source, right? And we can find it with objective rational thinking. And this kind of bleeds over into universalism as well. I apologize for if that makes that noise often. Something up with my computer today. But the universalism, this idea that there's a universal morality for everyone, everywhere, at all times, historical as well as present and in the future, right? Then I came up on absolutism, and absolutism is this authoritarianism. You could almost use these two words interchangeably, authoritarian and absolute. And this, of course, is saying whatever moral principles you have, X, Y, Z, that these are absolute, right? You're totally and authoritatively right or wrong things to do or don't do. And no matter what the context, no matter what the situation or circumstances, these would hold true. So it doesn't have to be in such like a dictatorship or some other social political organization such as that, like Nazis or Stalinists, or any kind of authoritarian dictatorship, so to speak, although that is present, right? Under Hitler, under Stalin, the rule is the rule, and they get to make them, and anyone else who breaks them, they get to punish them. How convenient, right? And this is why some of us, some philosophers and some others, look at the critical approach to things, specifically what is mentioned in my write-ups online about my philosophical background and sort of where I lean. These notions from critical theory, Frankfurt School specifically, and then post-structuralists, and these are kind of nationally divided, like the Frankfurt School is in Germany. You have Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and Herbert Marcuse. And then over across the border in France, you had the post-structuralists like Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, G. Deleuze, Roland Barthes. There's so many of these that I've read, but just a few of those to name drop some. And it's like what they were doing on both sides, both countries or schools of thought, kind of the same thing. They had this element of immanent critique in them. But unlike what a lot of ideologues and politicians and public philosophers, and I don't know how anyone feels about Jordan Peterson, but he is one of these who completely, totally gets these things wrong when he refers to post-Marxist critical theorists or something. And there, you see a lot of this going on in politics right now today, with supposedly teaching critical race theory in certain schools. All of this stuff belongs in college, for sure. So I hope they don't want to eradicate it from college, where you're supposed to have an open mind and learn all these different things and then make your own choices, right? You are adults at this point. And I really don't see why it's a problem so much if you're teaching it in high schools. And I've taught college before, and I've substituted for elementary and middle school. I taught a section in early college, and I see that a lot of the students this term are in early college. I'm very impressed by all of you. You have such great credentials and going into such great mind-expansing academic disciplines. I think this is awesome, and ethics and philosophy will help in all aspects of wherever you go from here. But here I am, I get on my random tangents. I like to talk, and I will get off topic a little, but it all comes back around. So absolutism is this type of authoritarianism. It doesn't have to be dictatorial. And you definitely see this in some religious groups, right? Fundamentalist religious groups, whatever the religion is. Don't think there's such a thing as fundamentalist Buddhist, Jain, or Hindu, although there could be some nationalist Hindus. India and Pakistan was formerly part of India until about the time of Gandhi, his late life, before his assassination, or right after. It was part of India, and the vast majority of people in that side of India, the western side, were Muslim, and the vast majority of the whole country, Hindu, or some variation of that. Hinduism is too broad of a term. It's not actually even one religion, and it's so absorbent, right? Any other religion that comes along, they say, oh yeah, that's just the same thing, and we incorporate it in, right? So my point was that there's this sort of absolutism in certain religions, and not all religions, but certain ideologies of those religions, certain fundamentalist or evangelical or extremist groups. And these are in the Middle East, in the United States, in Russia, in African countries. You know, it's not limited to one place. But they have a type of authoritarianism and absolutism. Right? They say killing is wrong. Say killing is wrong, period. And a lot of times you might run into hypocrisies and other problems with these such regimes because, you know, for starters, if you go to war with anybody, you can't really back up this notion that killing in and of itself is wrong. Then it becomes situational or circumstantial. That it's okay in war, or if it's okay to spread your doctrines. This is a type of authoritarianism or absolutism. More authoritarian. There's a slight difference, but they do overlap. So, absolutism, if you really want to make sense of it, is kind of the direct opposite of relativism. Where relativism says, sure, depending on the variation, like this is okay for you, it's okay for me, and we all have different approaches to these things. The absolutist is like, no, XYZ is wrong, and if you get caught doing it, you're going to be punished, however that punishment works, whatever society. And an authoritarianism is kind of a bigger extension of that when you have an authoritative power behind it. It's very similar. It's just you gotta be careful with the subtle difference of that the absolutism doesn't have to be from an authoritarian regime or person or leader. It doesn't have to be. At the same time, if you're following a religious tradition and the God or the organization of the religion itself, the governing bodies, say this XYZ is right, ABC is wrong, it still appeals to some kind of authority. Like this notion that the Bible is the inherent and inerrant Word of God, like it directly fell, and nothing can be changed. As I talked about in the earlier video, lots of problematic things in the Bible that were accepted during the time and culture that we don't agree with, And things such as slavery and like subordination of women, treating women as objects, property, even. And of course, we do keep in mind this was a different culture, this was a different time, this was a different place. But then one of the problems with that is trying to say, well, this applies today, right? If you believe it's supposed to apply forever. And then, wait a minute. There's certain fundamental principles that we believe in that hold, that just don't add up here, right? So, regarding that kind of problem, you might raise the question or think about, and it's not something you've read about yet, but I'll just go ahead and mention it, syncretic approach to ethics and moral theory. And syncretism is just a nice big word that means taking bits, the good parts or whatever parts you prefer from different traditions, different theories, and putting them together, like taking the good from everything without the bad, like mixing it together. And I did mention in our introductory video about the possibility of when we get through looking at all the ethical theories, that maybe, I mean, they're clearly not written in stone, but maybe there's a way to bridge a gap between two or more of the theories. And I think a lot of people today in the philosophical, academic, and other areas, professional areas, probably do have a combination of maybe a social contract, some consequentialism, and some deontological theory kind of mixed together. And maybe you looked ahead, or maybe you remember the definition from just a brief overview. But deontology looks at one's duties, obligations, responsibilities, and accountability. Accountability being that jumping off of responsibility is the accountability that means on the other side of that you can be an accountable person for your actions, aka being punished, or on the flip side, if such a thing did exist, being rewarded. It just gave me a light bulb idea. Our society, and I guess many others, work solely on the principle of a punitive system, punishment. And you can read Michel Foucault's famous and infamous book, The Birth of Prison, on that concept, when he does talk about prison and prison reform over the years and how the changes work. Ultimately, the book isn't even about that. It's about human subjectivity and how power dynamics work to constitute or create us, position us as certain types of subjects. And in this case of the word, if you recall, it's grammar thing, subject, predicate, object, and also that we are subjects. Subjectivity, my own perceptions and personal experiences that I can't really relate except through words, and words are always limited. So, like, if I say I had some kind of mystical experience, I could try to describe it in words, but you really don't have access to the subjectivity that is mine. For example, you go to the doctor's office complaining of pain somewhere in your body. The doctor doesn't have any way of knowing what kind of pain, or if you're even telling the truth. There's a twisted irony here. If you've seen the movie Girl Interrupted, which is a quasi-autobiographical book by Susanna Kaysen, and her experience with borderline personality disorder and being locked away in a psych hospital. This way back in the late 60s and such, early 70s. But my point there is that in one scene, she's talking to her friend who, I think this character ends up being her boyfriend. And I think it's his story of a friend of his that he's telling her that's very interesting. That he had a friend who hallucinated, who saw like little green men and whatever it was, and he was locked up. And after so long, the therapist and the psychiatrist would ask him, "Are you still seeing these things?" And of course, when anyone goes for help, you want to tell the truth. It can't help you unless you are honest and open. But as he went on with that story, and she responded with the question of, does your friend still hallucinate? Does he still see little green men or whatever they were? And he had told the hospital staff that he had stopped hallucinating, and that's how they let him out. And the problem was, he was still hallucinating. But see, the psychiatrist can't peel back the layer and examine in your mind what your actual thoughts, feelings, and all these things are. They go by your word, and they are very well trained to read your body language, your expressions. They know. You can't really get a lot of stuff past psychologists, therapists, particularly. However, there is a whole lot of trust involved. And I trust you as coming to me, the doctor, the therapist, as a patient, that you do have this issue you want to talk about, and these feelings and thoughts are real. At the same time, just trying to help you understand about subjectivity is, you really don't have access to that. Do you really know? Can you prove if, we'll just call him Mr. Friend, hallucinated or not? You're believing him because you have some trust, right? So, again, my point with all that is about the subjectivity part, right? You go to the doctor's office with the pain, as I mentioned before. On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is it? And even that is kind of arbitrary, because who's to say my level of 1 to 10 pain is the same as everyone else's 1 to 10 level? Right? You might have varying degrees. What about 10 and a half, right? So these kind of things, we have to ask and communicate with each other to understand these kinds of things, right? So also these notions of objectivism and universalism, all these notions kind of leave out a subjective experience. And being a transgender woman myself, I could see this in a lot of popular reactions to transgender people, and that now have the openness to come out and fighting to just be recognized as everybody else, just regular people like everybody else. Maybe not that regular or whatever, but we're all different. And I could put it personally like this, like, I think it's pretty sad and pretty bad and wrong, maybe even evil, maybe not necessarily, to judge someone because of their appearance and how they dress. And in a certain way, this is all it kind of boils down to in a political sense. You have a reactionary fear thrown out there about an outside group, and everybody's always talked about in abstract, like, the transgender people, this big group, as if it's a unified whole. And here I am, and I barely leave the house. I'm not part of a propaganda. I don't have an agenda. My agenda is wanting to be noticed, observed, and accepted just as a human being, regardless of what I look like, what medicines I take, what body parts I have or don't have, And I think this is the same for everybody else, right? We have this wacko kind of political ideas out here that we should be policing what's in people's pants. I don't know about you, but my mama said when I was growing up that those things are called privates. And if they're private, that means they're none of your business. People who want to find out what you have, right? And this, of course, is an ethical dilemma, right? In our modern day with this stuff. What bathrooms can you use? And I guarantee you that people go to the bathroom because they have to pee, not because they're out to do something bad. I've seen plenty of cisgender women, not even politely, go into men's rooms, come out of men's rooms. It's like, hey, I had to go. Big deal. What's it to you? They just kind of laugh it off. But so even that, if certain people who preach extremist stuff to society, it's kind of a contradiction there, right? And I know I'm going off on little rambles again, but it is my tendency. But if you think about my master's in liberal studies, we are trained to look at every single thing and find some kind of connection or interconnection with it. Sociology, philosophy, personal experience, politics, everything. So ethics is really involved in all this stuff. I mean, just think, it's our everyday lives. I meet people in my everyday life, if I had a life, interact with people I don't know, people I do know. It's really ironic that complete strangers are very accepting, at least most that I've run into, very complimentary. So don't worry about other people's opinions. You look beautiful, all these things. Like, where do these people come from? Like, I'm out here expecting so much bad reaction. And again, I don't really get out of the house a whole lot, but knock on wood, I haven't run into it yet and hope not to. Hopefully things will be getting easier in society, instead of saying the same or worse. Okay, so enough about that, enough about rambling about that issue or issues, and let's move forward, because I think I'm taking a little bit more time than I thought I would already, with just a few things at the end of the chapter. But hopefully you're finding these little lecture videos helpful. We don't meet face to face, so you kind of get a feel for me if I was in front of you in a classroom, and how I teach, how I think, how I ramble on, how much of a nerd and a dork I am, how much trouble I have with my hair. But anyway, and getting pins stuck in it. The next one we look at is Emotivism, and obviously I'm taking these video lectures very lightly as compared to an actual lecture class. We're relaxed. It's just kind of another COVID response that we are so used to doing things these days. So emotivism is not an approach to ethics, but more a statement about ethics, and actually even more precisely, because this goes into the philosophical field of logic, that moral utterances, and in other words for those are propositions or statements, that none of those can be true or false. It's not necessarily saying right or wrong, which is kind of different, even though in moral theory and such you might think that those two terms are overlapped, but they're not the same thing, right? So from a logical point of view, think about it this way: only statements, aka utterances, well, you can have utterances that aren't statements, but so let's just clarify. Only statements or propositions can be true or false. You can't have a true religion. True religion? I mean, I don't believe any one of them is like the answer to anything, but none of them are true. You can't say, well, Christianity is true because it's not a statement. Now, if you said something like Christianity is a religion that was founded by a figure named Jesus and around about the 1st century CE, and there's a lot of complications there because there's actually no historical evidence for a historical Jesus. But if there was, ironically enough, and we know this based on when the emperors and governors died, like King Herod, for example, from when he died and the possibility of Jesus' birth, it doesn't match up year-wise. So, it's kind of like Jesus would have been born between 4 and 7 years BCE, right? Before Christ, right? So Christ was born before Christ. Okay, there's a problem. That's why I use BCE and CE, like most academics do. In other words, like if we say this religion was founded by this figure named Jesus in this 1st century place, a Roman colony or district, if you will, region called Judea or Palestine, then that would be true or false, right? Was it founded by this guy in this place at this time? Yep. So that's true. Now, if we said something opposite, right, like, oh, okay, Christianity was founded by Napoleon Bonaparte in the 19th century France, well, that would be false. That's a false statement, and hopefully you can see the difference there. So emotivism is looking at it from a logical point of view, saying, like, if I wrote the statement, murder is wrong, or murder is evil, okay? We could say, well, these are true statements. They're telling a truth, making true claims. The problem is it an ontological reality? Or are we just saying things, right? And let me unpack this a little more, because this might be a little more difficult than it needs to be. What emotivism is saying is that moral ideas are simply emotional reactions, right? And the things don't even actually exist, like evil. We could point into the real world and say, murder, this body, this person was murdered by XYZ over there, right? This is a true statement, a true fact. Not married, maybe both. They might have married and murdered. Let's say J over here, right? X and J. He got married and then X murdered J. Hopefully marriages aren't that bad. I mean, I had my own. It was pretty bad. We didn't kill each other. So anyway, it's more or less a logical position that we just can't make true claims about that. Murder is on the floor, right? Oh my God, this person murdered that person. Is it wrong? Okay, show me wrong. I see a body, I see a knife sticking in the body, I see blood everywhere, I see this person over here in handcuffs. Police are putting him in the car, going to take him downtown and book him. So I can point to and say, make actual statements, which are either true or false, about all the events in circumstances. But I can't make a true or false claim about wrong or evil without some kind of appeal to emotion. In other words, emotivism is kind of saying what we think and say is morality is simply statements about what we like or don't like. Like we're opposed. We don't like the idea of murder, and the whole, of course, the whole "do unto others" thing. If we could put ourselves in other people's place, well, I don't want to murder anyone, and I also don't want to be murdered. So I have strong feelings about my life and being alive. I mean, I do. This is kind of dated music, but not really, because he's still the godfather of rap. But Dr. Dre said in one of his songs off the Chronic 2 album that he likes breathing, right? If it comes down to him and the people who were talking smack about it, right? In his song saying, if it comes down to you and me, it's going to be me because I like breathing, right? And this is where you could see a relativist problem, right? In the absolutist or everything. Like if you can't kill anyone at any time, what about when someone tries to kill me? Am I justified in self-defense? Our philosopher Immanuel Kant and other authoritarians or absolutists will say no. Nope, you can't. Sorry, I guess if you're unlucky, you're just going to get killed, but you can't stand up for yourself. I think that's both counterintuitive and counterinstinctive of the nature of a human being. Our instincts say self-preservation, right? Perhaps another thing we need to look at as far as ethics and moral theory altogether is how we are even constituted, how we are made or built. I mentioned the fact that there's literally a gap in the brain of someone with antisocial personality disorder. And this isn't solely the case of that one personality disorder. There are other problems elsewhere with other personality disorders. If I could just be confessional for a moment, I do have some mental health issues myself, and I know I am on this side of my life in abysmal depression, that things aren't that bad, right? That our minds kind of tell us a story, tell us a narrative, and you might have heard these things like negative self-talk. And this takes a lot of mindfulness and a lot of awareness, a lot of practice to catch yourself doing these things, and then switch gears, right? And so my point is that maybe we look a little further down into us as well, and I've read about the possibilities of these implementing or taking on these theories or hypotheses. And even a former student years and years, decades ago, yeah, definitely decades ago, at least one, he brought up this idea too, that in order to go about ethics, moral theory, social and political, that we don't need to start with these theories and these books and such, but with ourselves. Take a good, long, deep look within. Exactly what kind of person am I? So this kind of stuff isn't really mentioned here, but something to think about. Maybe you want to bring it up somehow in your final research papers. So, okay. So emotivism, there's not a lot to emotivism. Just as the word suggests, that we're building things on our emotions, right? So let's give you another example. So I have a dog, and Americans love our pets. They're like little babies, our fur babies, right? So more often than not, because we have internalized this new type of pet culture, pet mentality, we even have insurance for pets. You have take your dog to work day and everything. But culturally and psychologically, these entities, these beings, have literally become a person. They have now attained personhood, right? So many times we drive out in the country or whatnot and see a dog chained up to a big tree in the dirt. We kind of think that's wrong, right? Or if someone kicks a dog, right? We think that's wrong. It's wrong to kick a dog. It's wrong to kick a cat. It's wrong to abuse an animal, right? Especially a pet. These are psychologically, these are different. It's a different kind of animal than a livestock animal. We don't look at cows or chickens the same way as we look at dogs and cats. When we say, yum, unless you're vegetarian, and I was a vegetarian for 18 years. It's another story, but yeah, unless you're a vegetarian, and maybe you don't eat a particular type of animal's flesh, in case of certain religious traditions, Judaism and Islam, for example, no pork. And this is not true of all Hindus, just certain little segments about being vegetarian. And I grew up with this kind of hearing this kind of nonsense from my father and other people, that when you see images, probably more so back in the times of my youth, won't even go into that, maybe more so then than now, you have images from India on the news or documentaries or such, and they often have cows walking in traffic, right? People on bicycles, people with carts and trolleys and cars, of course. A lot of stuff I heard was like look, they're starving to death and have cows walking around in the street that they don't eat, right? But the cow is a sacred animal in certain Hindu schools of thought, and it goes way back to Indo-Aryan tradition, or Indo-European, if you want to. This is a kind of a problematic with that term, but this is an officially recognized term. The word Iran, for the country Iran, literally means in Persian, Aryan, right? It's not some super race or anything. This was just the name of a large ethnic group, right? From like Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Burma, and other little places trickling around. So my point here is, this goes way, way back, like even to the earliest or pre-Hindu concept, like the concept of it being one big organized religion kind of thing. Back to the Vedic period, and I know unless you've had a religious studies class, this might not be familiar, but just bear with me that the point really is that the cow has been a sacred animal since way back, and we're talking 10, 12, maybe even 15,000 years, at least 10, give or take, right? Or at least 9, we might say. Because India has been discovered that what Indian historians, and everybody has always said that the Indus River Valley civilization was actually the first, not Sumer or Egypt. And so more recent evidence has suggested the Indus Valley civilization goes all the way back to at least 9,000 years, which is before 9,000 BCE, I think, right? Before everything else. Unless we find something in the others. But this archaeological work keeps going on. Again, I know I'm rambling, and I apologize. But I just wanted to think about the cow situation and these claims, because it's not really fair to say of a culture or people that, like, criticize them for having large amounts of poverty or other socioeconomic problems, and then criticize them by saying, well, you have cows walking in the street. It's a sacred animal to certain groups of people in India. But here's the really clincher part that a woman like me would always pick up on, even when I was a little boy instead of a little girl, that the cows were skinny too. Like if you look back at any of this old footage, the cows are just skinny. as the people in poverty. So it's not like there's a lot to eat in the first place. And it kind of belittles, it kind of just destroys the very point that my father or whoever was trying to make. It reminds me of another one he made when in the 80s when Ethiopia was struck with a famine, and it was on the news, and he said, and this is really ridiculous, he said, look at that. You know why they're starving? Because they're not Christians. And it turns out that Ethiopia is one of the first Christian nations ever. And famine is due to environmental and insect things, right? Not because of belief. If that was the case, then everybody everywhere around the world who's not Christian, or people who came before Christians, they wouldn't have had livestock or fields or anything. It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, so the kicking of the dog, or I don't know, even messing with the cow, it's a different type of psychology. Like the cow is a person now. Our dogs and cats are people, persons, right? And so emotivism would say, well, it's wrong to kick a dog, and, well, not an emotivist, but an emotivist, say a logician looking at moral statements, it's wrong to kick a dog. Well, you're saying that only because you don't like it. This is sort of the heart of emotivism to me. That, and really it's complicated to say it that way, because it in and of itself is not a thing, emotivism. But I guess it's a little bit of an approach, more of an interpretation, I guess, that all these things that we claim, murder is wrong, torture, rape, killing dogs, even if you are vegetarian for ethical reasons, like I was, to say that eating the flesh of animals is wrong, it's kind of simply because you have a little sentiment about it, right? Oh, it's my doggy, or my sacred cow, or my pet python, even. It's, for the record, those aren't pets and can't ever be. I have a friend, or had a friend, who had, I think, at least 2, if not 3 pythons, pet pythons, and they bit him, right? And yeah, you can't train a snake, right? So my point here is, even if it's a snake, like, you don't want anything to harm it because you have some kind of an attachment to it, or your other people, loved ones, friends. You don't want anything bad to happen to them because you know them, because you have a sentiment or feelings for them. And this also kind of harkens back to the social political commentary I made, and I did use transgender people as an example, but it could be biological sex, it could be race, it could be ethnic background, it could be language, even cultural practices, religion. Even within a particular religion, sometimes the different denominations or factions disagree with each other, and it's in history they call this great schisms, right? But hopefully you get the idea there. It's saying that our statements about morality are more sentiments. They're not based on logical evidence, or ontological evidence, you might say. And again, ontology refers to being, right? Just straight up being. This clipboard exists. I exist. The clinky bracelets exist, right? What doesn't exist is stuff like wrong, evil, right, good, bad. And you can see how this might tie into relativism. Like, okay, exactly what is good? Exactly what is wrong? Why do we call things wrong? And you can see that these first 2 chapters are just setting the stage for us. Now we're kind of filled with a whole bunch of questions. Yeah, what are we talking about? How do we know what's right and wrong? These are questions that you should be asking. because we don't want to appeal to authorities. We don't want to appeal to tradition. We want to use our own rational brains to figure this out. Now, for the sake of our studies, we have these other big brain people, philosophers, who have already theorized this stuff and written it down, and we get to look at what they say. So we'll do that, and hopefully this lays the groundwork and the foundation for us getting there. There was one final thing, or maybe a couple final things I want to touch on. And I do apologize for already being 45 minutes because I didn't want it to take that long. I didn't really think I would. But the last thing here is nihilism. And I don't recall it being mentioned in the first 2 chapters, but I'm sure that it shows up somewhere. And nihilism is a term that can be applied to, like, not just morality, but like social political things, or the idea of truth even, or facts. Like, yeah, there's just nothing. The root word of nihilism is nihili, Nihil, or sorry, I got it misspelled, I think, nihili, but it's Latin, and it just means nothing, or nothingness. So nihilism is the belief in nothing, right? So personally, for example, I have held an ontological position, at least parts of my life, not all, that is kind of nihilistic. There really is nothing, right? Okay, so we have a scientific explanation, a bunch of matter, energy, whatever you want to say, so dense and it kind of crushed in on itself and had to explode, right? And this created the foundational movement in the universe for everything else to expand and come into being, right? Ontologically, right? This is a type of scientific cosmology, right? An explanation of the cosmos. But as you could see, with just rationality, there's no God, nothing divine, nothing otherworldly, nothing supernatural. We can cross all of those things off. So basically, we're just apes with big brains, and we wear clothes, and we have neuroses, and we eat junk food. So we're just kind of an ape that can think. So these apes that can think, called humans, you look back and have science and can explain everything in the world and the universe, so far as we know anyway. Okay, so what does it mean? And this was kind of where I became philosophical as a child. Just a natural inclination. I started thinking about death and don't want to die, and asking existential questions to myself. And the one that I do remember, 40 plus years, is why are we born? Why are we even born if we're only going to die? And I was even raised Christian, raised Baptist, in a fundamentalist home, no less. And this is one of the reasons I can speak so much about these things. Personal first-hand experience. And then going off to college and university and studying the Bible, studying religions. And, they just bump heads, right? So I kind of had a nihilistic point of view. That, there really is nothing. Where's anything? What does it all mean? What's the purpose? What's the point? And I'm also one of those kinds of people who needs for everything to make sense. Like, and this is kind of a neuroses of my own, because it's like anxiety or depression or dwelling on it. Like, you can't always have this. You can't always figure this out. Not all things make sense, and sometimes you just don't know how to make sense of it. But my brain wants to force it to make sense. I need explanation. I need sense. And then when you see or conclude there's all these things on the checklist are marked off, what he left with? Nothing. Atoms in a void. Or as I prefer to think, that everything is energy. And actually coming back to this, about everything being energy, gave me a reawakening of my spirituality. It's completely different, right? So nihilism is just this. It could be moralistic nihilism. There aren't any moral facts at all, right? Just opinions. This is actually a quote from my favorite philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. He literally wrote, "There are no moral facts, only opinions." Okay. Now here's the problem. I don't think he was a nihilist, and I think most scholars would agree. And ironically enough, this is propped up right in front of the book called Nihilism Before Nietzsche, ironically enough. My Nietzsche section here. But it could also be like a universal thing, which kind of also includes moral. That there's just nothing at all anywhere. Like, all this stuff is just arbitrary. Does it even make sense? That we create language that creates concepts for us to think about things with, but we're still just little extensions of all this. What do we know? And from what we do know, we might conclude, well, there's not even anything to know. But we humans don't like this. We don't like gaps. And we don't like the idea of nothingness. Unless you're a Buddhist, particularly a Zen Buddhist, the idea of sunyata, nothingness, is actually a goal. The nothingness of a mental state, a psychological state, aka further spiritual state. But Buddhism is a little more complicated than other religions, and of course not our class here. So, and there you go. So overall, we have subjectivism, relativism, emotivism, objectivism, universalism, and I did say there was a lot of isms, and authoritarianism, absolutism, and finally give you nihilism or nihilism. And that should wrap up the first two chapters. And our next chapter, chapter 3, is going to look at logical argumentation, and specifically directed at how to both evaluate moral arguments and actually formulate them yourselves. Like, we need to know how to do good argumentation, because this is straight up from logic, straight up from our rationality. This helps us use our brains rationally. So next section will be on that, and we're only doing this one chapter per this section, and you will, I'm sure, definitely appreciate it's only one. It is a larger chapter, and the material is really dense, logic stuff. It's not my favorite, aka logic is not my favorite. It wasn't my favorite course as a philosophy major, but it was required. Finally made it out of it, but only to end up having to teach some of it. So that's our next place, and like, get your brain ready for like explosion. This logic is not easy, and it might be fun to some, might be fun sometimes, but not always. So, and then a final thought, this coming from your textbook, is that you will use, or can use, the study of ethics in lots of fields these days. You have business ethics, pharmaceutical ethics, you really need that, medical ethics, ethics in different branches or types of technological fields, just professional ethics in general, you know. Kind of goes hand in hand with business ethics. Of course, you have the social and political ethics, as always, journalistic ethics, environmentalist ethics, scientific ethics. Right? For example, here's where our scientific or medical, more like cosmetic than medical or pharmaceutical or any of this. But for testing things on animals, animal testing. Right? There are a lot of people, animal rights advocates and such, who totally oppose to this. Then people kind of in the middle. As always, there are people on both sides and in the middle. But and as much as I want to see animals, even though I've stopped being a vegetarian, and even though I've stopped being a Buddhist, but now returned to Hinduism, there is an appeal to that animals are sentient creatures as well. And the whole principle in Buddhism is that all sentient creatures, that a primary existence is suffering, whereas in Christianity, primary existence is sin. It says suffering, and suffering is caused by attachment, of course, blah, blah, blah. But the sentient creatures, we're not talking about plants or anything, but humans and other animals, we have 5 senses, we have a brain, we have feelings, emotions. And you can tell this with lots of animals: chimps, gorillas, elephants, dolphins, seals. I mean, elephants are amazing when it comes to learning about non-human animals and emotions and feelings. These, I don't know if you've seen any documentaries on elephants, but these are wondrous creatures. Very human-like, but not. So, there's one for this, in that we have to do experiments or tests on something for things that humans use: medicines, cosmetics, right? All these things. So now we take a step back. Okay, I want to treat animals right, but if the science and medical and all these other fields need to do testing, I mean, do I want to put on some eyeliner one day that might have something in it that would make me go blind? No. So how do I know whether or not this will happen? I trust people and doing these tests or experiments to figure out if something is safe, right? So here's a big ethical dilemma. Okay, on the one hand, is it wrong to hurt animals in any way? On the other hand, if we don't do tests on something similar to us, sometimes chimps, sometimes rats, even though they're not really that similar, then what are the consequences for us? We might jump ahead to consequentialism here. The harm that it does to the one chimp or rat or however many, the good that it we give to human beings from that bad, in a consequentialist point of view, outweighs, right? The happiness, the good part of the humans outweighs the little suffering of the test animals. So in that sense, that would be better, right? And what about medicines and such? What if you give something to your baby? Well, I don't want to give my baby a medicine and it just die or get sick and need to go to ER. So I want to have some kind of certainty in these things, right? Some kind of trust. But there you go. Like, there's an overlap in all these things. And of course you have philosophers to be ethicists, and you have a lot of counselors and advisors in ethics. I have even, and I mentioned this to one of the students in a message, I've even put on my resume or in my job search categories for Indeed, I put ethicist on there as well. Say, I am trained in it, so why not, right? Okay, we're right at an hour, and I'm sorry again that this took so long, but hopefully it's very beneficial, and maybe you even enjoy listening to my rambling. So, gonna try to stop it before the actual hour mark, and I'll start making video on argumentation and logic and all those things for our next section, and let's all keep working and keep doing such a great job. Till next time, bye.